struggle to get your kids to bed, bring them to city council.
I mean, and also the way to get people involved.
That's right. That's right.
You know?
That's right.
If you're looking to get especially young parents, they're busy.
Exactly. It is a real thing. A lot of people have suggested this. I mean, when we think about the equitable access to city government.
Something I want to talk about.
Yeah, and how many people can actually how many people can even attend our meetings? And so, childcare is a big barrier to that.
Okay, so here's the thing. I really do believe in local government. It's nice having a functioning sewage system. Zoning affects all of us. The parks here in Bloomington are hard to beat. And yet, in spite of all that, I cannot get myself to a city council meeting. So I wanted to talk with someone who can. Someone who was so into city council that they wanted to join it. Last spring, I heard Isak Asare on a local podcast, The 812. He was talking about what public life means to him. He had just become one of Bloomington's 3 at-large city council members. So I reached out. In his day job, Isak works at the Hamilton Lugar School of Global and International Studies here at Indiana University. He's got some serious titles over there. The Assistant Dean for Undergraduate Education and Student Affairs and the Co-Director of the Cybersecurity and Global Policy Program. He and I talked in May. He was only 2 months into his term as a Bloomington City Council member, and he's still at that warm glow of optimism most of us have at the beginning of a project. I think he'll keep it, though. And in any case, that can-do attitude is what we want in our representatives. Isak and I talked about why public life is meaningful, how budgets are moral documents, and about how protocol, which is kind of the most boring topic ever, like, do you get 3 minutes or 5 minutes to speak on a topic? Questions like that. We talked about how protocol affects who's able to participate in a meeting, which is to say, how protocol is pretty intimately intertwined with justice. All right, here we go.
Public radio is radio that matters, and our sustainers keep it going strong year after year. Thank you for your support of WFIU.
As we talked about when I emailed you to ask about coming on, the thing that prompted me, that got me curious, was that quote that you referenced in Steve Volan's podcast.
Shout out to Steve Volan.
Shout out to Steve Volan from Lee Hamilton about how to live a life through, or to be in politics is to live more fully.
Yeah, and I think his direct quote, I think what the incomparable Lee Hamilton said, and I hope I'm not misquoting him, I would hate to ever do that, is that he said, I can't say for certain that living a public life is to live better, but I can say that it's to live more fully. And it's I certainly have found that to be true. That I think the reason why is service. At the end of the day, we are not here on this earth for ourselves, but for one another. And we do live in a society and a community, and our responsibility is to one another. There's that famous philosophical treatise, like What We Owe Each Other, and I think that through being involved in the political process, through being a politician, which I'm sort of like loath to say of myself. People want to say like to be a public servant or something like that. But it's like, I've learned so much about our community. Over the last 2 years, I've knocked on over 10,000 doors in this community. You learn a lot about the people that you live with. But then being elected, the type of concerns that people bring to you, from the things that even I don't know if I thought this was going to be as exciting as it was, but the first time somebody wrote me saying, I want to remember exactly what the problem was. It was, so during the rollout of the fiber optic cables, the company had pierced a sewage pipe or something like that, and just like ever so slightly. And so some months later, the problem manifests, and it starts manifesting for everybody in this neighborhood, right? And so I get copied in like the middle of a thread by the neighborhood association, basically being like, what is our city gonna do about this? And I just responded, but it was thrilling. It was so thrilling because it feels like a mundane thing, but this is affecting people's day-to-day existence. Potholes affect people's day-to-day existence. Whether sidewalks are complete affect people's day-to-day existence. Where there's parking, so on and so forth. And it was so exhilarating. This was like, a couple weeks into the term to then work through, okay, what really was the problem? Who in the city can help deal with this? How can I help get them the response that they're seeking? How can I get them the information that they need? How can I put pressure to make this happen faster? And then in the back of my mind thinking, how do I fix this so that nobody else has to go through these problems again? Was just, that is in my mind living life more fully. And so not only getting to know our community, what drives people, what people are really worried about on a day-to-day basis, but then actually being in the arena to help make their lives a little bit easier, make their burdens a little lighter. I just can't think of anything more exciting than that.
So was that a surprise to you how exhilarating it was? Or was that like exactly why you had gotten into it?
In retrospect, I can say that it was exactly why I got into it. But, if you would have asked me 2 years ago, hey, are you looking forward to helping people fix potholes or something like that, right? Like, I don't, woo, right?
Yeah, exactly.
I don't think I would have, shouted with joy, but honestly, it is. It's. And this is still true. This is also part of what makes this very exciting, is that it's not just the immediate things, but it's also having some influence and power over changing some of the larger structural things. Thinking about the reasons, the structures, the rules, the processes that are leading to those type of outcomes in the first place, and being able to think on a systems level about all of the people in Bloomington. So it's as much about, John who lives in, house X on street Y, right? As it is about and his issue with the pothole in front of his house, as it is about thinking about, well, how are we funding street maintenance? How do we find out whether or not there are potholes? But then there's a lot of other things too: poverty and food insecurity and housing, obviously, right? And so it is just very, very exciting. And we think about this role as, it's sort of classified, if you will, as like a part-time job with the city. There's not a moment when I'm not thinking about these things. And it's changed. I don't know. You should ask my wife at some point if I'm still as fun to go on walks with, because I go on walks and I'm thinking about why is there a tree there? Why don't we have benches here? That building could have a cooler facade, right? Who approved this?
Yeah, that must be a little hard for the people around you sometimes.
Yeah, but it's I don't always share these things, but it's just I think I've I'm maybe overemphasizing this, but it's true. I really think that Lee Hamilton had it right. This is a way to live more fully.
So I want to come back to the thinking structurally aspect, and that kind of there's tactics and strategy, and what is the sort of strategy for the community and all that stuff, and especially around equity and all that. I might even want to talk about Robert's Rules of Order, but before we get to that, I'd love to hear a little bit about what in your personal history brought you to this point of being interested in city politics. Like, you were born in Sweden,
yes.
Right. And grew up all over the place and have also worked internationally. And you've advised governments and all kinds of things on AI policy.
What in your growing up led you to the point that you are now the person who's also a city council member at large?
In short, I have no idea. But no.
This is a place for you to figure that out.
Yeah, exactly. Existential questions over here with Alex Chambers.
Exactly.
Well, so it might seem trite to say this. My mom, so you said I was born in Sweden, and that's because my mother was in Sweden doing her LLM, but she had decided to do that because she was sort of pursuing her own heritage, if you will. Her dad was Swedish, and so she was trying to get a better sense of who she was, et cetera. And met my dad there, who was a refugee from West Africa, and then sometime later, my mom joined the State Department, and so that's the reason we moved so much. I mean, so she was working in international law, mostly for USAID, and so we were sort of moving every 2 to 3 years, and they did other things in between as well. But I think it was instilled in us very early on that when you can make a difference, if you don't, then that's a problem, and I just want to do everything possible to make our community everything they can be. So I think it was sort of that the tension between a impatience and an optimism. So there's this like, I want things to change, and I have to be involved to make them change, but also just knowing that our efforts aren't in vain, and that that we can be everything that we imagine being as a community, and it's just an exciting thing. Like, right? Like how do you say no to that opportunity?
It's true. So, what are some of the barriers that you've been seeing?
Well, I mean, let's start off with information flows. We are essentially in a news desert at the moment, and I don't mean to. This is no knock on any of the incredible journalists who work and live in this area and cover this area. But the reality is that with the trends in media and news coverage right now, is that sometimes events are reported on 2-3 days after they happen, and it's very difficult to get information about what's going on in Bloomington. In fact, this is quite fun. The probably the most popular Facebook group in Bloomington is What's Going On Bloomington, and then of course there's the counterculture one, which is called What's Really Going On Bloomington. But those aren't like those are places for people to be like, I'm looking for a contractor, like who can help, right? Is what they sort of devolve into, and so it's really difficult to get information about what's happening. And I think that we're meeting here two days after an election where 10% of the population showed up to vote, and that ultimately decided quite a few elections, and people didn't show up. And then you wonder, well, they don't, you look at the commissioner campaign, most of the candidates spent most of their energy describing what commissioners do, as an example. So I think that's a barrier. I think that we've lost a lot of our third places, if you will, which is, people need, when we talk about third places, it's people need, a home, that's your first place, a place of work, that's your second place, and then a sort of social space and civic spaces. I think we've lost a lot of that. I think this was made worse by COVID. And then, of course, sort of other external things. So I think with all of those things happening at once, that sort of leads us where we are today. And then you have a city government that's very bureaucratic. That, just you start with our budget as the first thing. It is inaccessible, and even as somebody who broadly does public policy as for a living, a normal, just an everyday, non-public citizen, I would say, maybe is a better way of saying that. I used to, look and say, hey, how's the city spending its money? I could never figure it out, right? in the type of time that one would want to commit to it, I should say. And that's a problem. Our city council meetings go until midnight, and most of it is process. Very little substance actually, I think, takes place during the many, many hours. So if you were to come to one of our meetings, you might sit there for an hour before you hear the first presentation on the thing that we're going to vote on.
So let's get into that just a little bit more. Explain to me how most of it is processed.
Okay, so this is how a business meeting goes. We start at 6:30, at which point we're going to spend about 10 to 15 minutes being like, welcome to the meeting. This is what the agenda is today. We're now going to do our land and labor acknowledgement. After that, every council member gets time to give an update. Now, there's no real structure for how we give updates. We can just say whatever we want at this point in time. So
do you have limited amounts of time?
There's like an overall limit for this, and this so this section of the time can take, I think it's 20 minutes. But so all of us just say some things. I had a constituent meeting, or I'm going to have a constituent meeting, or I just had some thoughts about something, or I'm going to read something about something. Right? We're just whatever.
Sort of a check-in.
It's just it could be anything. There's no upper or lower limit here, right?
Wow.
So that happens for a while. Then we do reports from committees. So, and even if there's no reports, we'll just sort of say, we have a whole thing to have to say there are no reports. We approve minutes. That's a whole thing. We'd like to make a motion to put all the minutes together so we can vote for them as one. Is everybody in favor of voting for these as one? Yeah, let's vote on whether or not we can vote on them as being one. We all vote in favor. Yay. Oh, but somebody's online. We have to vote roll call. Okay, each person is going to have to vote one by one. Councilmember so-and-so, Councilmember so-and-so. Okay, yay. We all agree we're going to now vote for the minutes. Now, let's vote for the minutes. Would anybody like to approve minutes? Well, actually, there's a comma on page 2 that's missing. So, could we please add that comma? Okay, so once we've done all that, we're like, all right, now let's get to work. Okay, now, if you've come to opine on a new development. It's now 7:30, 8 maybe. And at this point now, we're going to do presentations on the thing that we're about to vote on. And so by the time you're done with the first presentation, by the time we get to questions, it's been now 2 hours maybe?
Yeah.
Now public can comment on the thing. That's a barrier. And so I've been advocating a lot about, for example, how we should start thinking about different ways to meet, because what I'd love to see is more open input time with constituents. Yeah, that's right. Earlier on, right? That time shouldn't be in between the first meeting on the first Wednesday and the second meeting. That doesn't make sense. That should be part of the process, and it should be built in and scheduled, right? And then sort of followed through with,
so that people can be having conversations about the thing that might happen.
That's right.
Can find out about
that's right.
Don't end up in that situation of Arthur Dent in
Yes.
Hitchhiker's Guide, where he's like, oh, well, the fact that we were going to tear down your house for the highway was was on clear view in the basement, behind the locked door for a month.
That's right. And we debated it at a time when you weren't even there.
Yeah,
right. And we made this decision. And that was based on a plan that was written in 1982 that we're now getting around to doing. That's a problem, right? And so it is our responsibility to make government accessible. It's not people's responsibility to access government. And this is where the mayor and I talk a lot about this notion that, yes, the metaphor works, that you say, hey, I want to bring more people to the table. But actually, that's not what you want to do. It's not that you want to bring more people to the table. You've made a lot of decisions in that case. I'm 6'6", right? So if people have never seen me in person, if you invite me to your table, I may not fit at your table. Right? You've decided what table we're going to sit at, right? You've decided where I'm going to sit at that table. You've decided who else is going to be at that table. But what you really want to do is engage people to help you build the table in the first place. Right? If we're going to extend the metaphor. And that's equity. That's the difference between the sort of notions of inclusion and equity. And in a lot of other places in the U.S., we talk about diversity, equity, and inclusion. A lot of other places, they put equity first. They call it EDI. And so the main goal is actually, everybody should have a stake here. And we want to be purposeful about helping citizens, residents, think, be a part of this process. And we have to do that by design. Like it's not going to happen incidentally.
And what are some models for that?
I don't know, like in terms of like local government, like other places, if that's what you're asking, like have other places done this well? If you look at like cities that I think are maybe really interesting for us, like you look at places like Fort Collins as an example, or which is I think is if you look back like 15 years ago, was like a city about the size of Bloomington, college town, right? Maybe is a little, we're about 50-50 like student population to non-student population. There's maybe 20. There may be 20/80, so maybe a more thriving non-student population. But they have an open budgeting process that lasts about 2 years. And think about like everything we do goes from this moral document that is our budget, right? And so they've adopted what's called the budgeting for outcomes process, which is not perfect, but starts with you saying, what are the goals that we want to have as a community? And that necessitates input from the community. And they do this over a 2-year window. They're saying so, and then they're going to budget for 2 years. So they have two. So if you imagine a 4-year council term, the first 2 years are getting input for the next 2 years, right? And so in order to make this budget work, which is a moral document that is going to determine all of the programs, all of the activities of your city government, you're getting all of this input from constituents throughout. So I think that's a really interesting model. I'm actually presenting a resolution to move us towards a model similar to that this coming Wednesday. So I think that's a really interesting model. I think there's a lot of really interesting work being done around consensus building activities. When you think about consensus, I think a lot of people sort of misuse that term. What they mean is that consensus means everybody agrees. But what consensus means really, like technically speaking, consensus is that nobody has a reason to say no. Right. So it may not be that everybody says yes. Like getting everybody to yes is probably not ideal. It's not a realistic ideal is what I should say. But it is possible to get everybody to a position where they say, okay, this isn't my best outcome, but there's nothing that there's no reason why I need to oppose this. Right. And I think that's sort of how you might think about. So you said you might talk about Robert's Rules as an example. The fundamental issue of Robert's Rule is that it's an up-down system. It is not built on consensus. It's built on majority passing things. So you either accept it or you reject it. Now, there are provisions where you can sort of say, I want to accept line 1 and you separate the question and say, I don't want to do this, but I do want to do that. But that's really difficult to negotiate, right?
And probably incredibly time-consuming. It gets back to that whole issue that you were talking about earlier.
And it favors those who have the ability to know the rules. So it's not actually focused on, hey, how do we get to the best outcome here about the things that we're working on? It's just focused on, like, how do we get a thing passed with as many people as possible saying yes. Like it's subtle, but that's to me I think a radical difference. And so thinking about incorporating more sort of consensus building activities, I think could be really, really interesting as well. But yeah, so those are I think maybe some unstructured thoughts on what was a very good question.
I thought that was great. I thought that was interesting. You're right. I guess we got the Fort Collins example, so that was good. That was helpful.
There are other places that are doing, like Bend, Oregon, I think is another similar place. Boulder, Colorado, another similar place. And then there are like big cities who do these type of things, like Seattle.
Do you think you're going to run into challenges in trying to pass this?
For sure. Oh, for sure. I mean, it's not First off, it's not something that you can just say. And no, I have to explain something about this that I didn't say well. Just because the name, I'm taking for granted what the name communicates. So I think we should move towards an outcome-based budgeting model. Again, not a panacea, no silver bullet here. But what that does is you start with the goals and priorities that you have for your city government. Say the things that are most important to us, right, are these, let's say 100 things. 20 things ideally, but here are the 100 things that we're working towards. And then you have to have a very difficult conversation, which is these matters most. Which of these things is the most important to us? And as a consequence, what outputs should we be funding that are going to lead us toward this outcome?
Right.
Right?
I want to go back for just a second to that conversation, that really difficult conversation.
Yes.
How does that happen? How does that conversation happen?
And that is so
like?
Yeah. So to answer your question about do you get pushback here, like, right? Like, that's the hard part, and that's the part I don't know the answer to, right? Okay. Like, and we're starting to think about this. It's like, how do you come up, like, even just with a group of 9, like, how do you get 9 council members to be like, we agree, here are our priorities?
Yeah.
That's hard, right? So I don't. This is going to be the experimental part, right?
Okay.
And
then how much of that is, at which points in the process is the broader community involved,
right?
Because it could be never ending.
It should be. That's right.
On the one hand,
well, that's right.
But
it should be iterative, and it should be a never-ending process of us constantly saying, like this isn't like we say our number one priority is homelessness, addressing issues around the unhoused, right? Helping end homelessness. That's even too bold. I mean, I'm sorry, I'm misspeaking. I'm not being precise enough. That what we want to do is make homelessness rare, brief, and unrepeating. That's what we would call functional zero. Okay, and we say priority number 1 is reaching functional zero in this community. Okay, so we reach functional zero in this community. Do we then go? Let's say that's in 5 years, 3 years, 2 years, whenever. Do we then turn around and say, you know what? We don't need to do anything with that homelessness anymore, right? Of course not.
Right. We just drop that whole thing and move on.
Yeah, exactly. So it's always going to be an iterative process that we say, okay, it's about housing. Okay, well, what if housing is priority 1, 2, or 3, wherever it's high on our list in Bloomington? We have to be even more specific. Like, what do we mean? Is it just we need more houses? Is it that we need more affordable houses? Is it that we need more people to own houses? Like what exactly do we mean? And now this is something interesting. When I was campaigning, I talked to so many people, and everybody says, oh, housing is the number one thing. And I finally talked to somebody who said, they've been saying that for 15 years, right? And it's like, okay, how's everybody constantly saying, that's what it's all about, running on that platform, getting elected on that platform, and then running again on that platform in 8 years? So that's because we haven't had the hard conversation of like, actually, what do we mean, right? And how do you hold people accountable to ideas that they themselves have just sort of, that aren't measurable? How do you hold people accountable to ideas that aren't built on consensus? How do you move from that, right? And then you get, I think that becomes a barrier for people being participating in the process in the first place because
they lose hope. They lose.
That's it.
They feel like, oh, nothing's going to happen. Why?
That's it. And so
one of the things you're saying, I feel like that you were saying sort of at the beginning was, one of the things that you find so energizing about it is being able to be a participant.
Yes.
And actually see your ideas and the things that you see as valuable play out.
Mm-hmm.
And so if non-elected people also, regular, citizens,
that's right,
were able to see those things happen too, they might be more likely to be involved.
Exactly. And it creates this virtuous cycle where your input, that it was tied to some output. And if that's the case, you're going to keep contributing. And if we can continue to build on that, before we know it, we'll all be engaged, right? And that's
we'll
what we're
all be
trying
coming to city council meetings, the whole town.
That would be wonderful. Then they certainly wouldn't be as long. And we'd be much more judicious about how we spent time, because the realities, these sort of vague realities, they're true now, but it's vague. That it's like, we are spending your time. You're not spending my time if our meeting is long, right? It's like, but we are literally spending your time.
We being the council.
Yes. Yeah. And I think it, like at this level, like talking here in a studio, right? It's like very easy to say that it's the people of Bloomington are the forefront of everything that I say and do, and but to actually incorporate that then in decision making processes and is, I think, easier said than done.
All right, let's take a break. When we come back, we'll consider going door to door to talk about city budgets and whether society exists. Stick around. Welcome back. As I mentioned at the beginning, Isak had been in office for about 2 months when we spoke.
So you're really coming in and seeing these things. Like, I imagine your eyes are really being open to these things in a new way, having,
Yes.
been
Yes.
there.
Yes.
for only a
And
few
well,
months.
realizing that, you see it from the outside, when as an engaged citizen, you start seeing, hey, well, sometimes the refrain, right, that you would hear here is people being like, well, it's a lot more complicated than I realized. And that's actually not my response. I would rather say that every complication is our own doing. We literally have 100% agency to change these things. So someone said something along the lines early on. I was just commenting on like, oh, we should whatever change some process this way or that way, and the person says they go, well, that would require a change in code. But the implication was like, oh, that would be like so hard. Like we can't change code. I'm like that's literally our job. Like our job is like code, right? And so I'm like okay, like let's do that then. Right? How about we change it?
So have you managed to convince anyone yet? Not necessarily.
Oh yeah, I think
you have.
and I don't want to make this the I mean this is, somebody said you can only really do one thing, right? So I said you can only not just one thing ever, but like they say during your term on council, the advice that everyone would give was like just focus on like a thing. So the thing I've been focusing on is like we're gonna have better processes.
Woohoo!
Like,
That's
whoa,
so exciting.
so sexy, right?
Right,
It's like
I
sign
want to
me
come
up-
to that meeting.
Sign me up for a TED Talk. Like,
Really?
I'm like, I'm being so flippant about something that's like super interesting. But
It is. It's really interesting and important. As we've also been discussing.
we'll
but
find
this is
out.
the problem.
We'll find out if you post this podcast.
Right. If it makes the cut. Well, I don't know yet.
But you're right. I mean, it's the point is that nobody actually focuses on those type of things, right? And it's very difficult to stop a moving train. Momentum and inertia, I think, are our biggest enemies in many cases. In government, because there's both the positive inertia of like the thing is moving, so it's not going to stop, but there's also the thing is not moving, so it's not going to move thing, right? I mean, as an example, we set the schedule for the council basically the whole year in advance. So you sort of say, here are all the times we're going to meet. Now, when I was coming in, they sort of sent us, hey, this is what we're about to vote on, just so you're all aware. This is what the schedule is. And I'm like, why are we even meeting that much? And I don't mean that in like a flippant way. I'm just saying like it's really hard once you've scheduled a meeting to unschedule that meeting, right? And if you have a meeting scheduled, you're going to fill that schedule just like a natural gas. It's going to fill all available space, right? And so
Hot air.
yeah, and so we have to be really mindful of that. It's really difficult once you're in that to take a step back and say, hey, actually, let's not do it this way, right? So yeah, I mean, you can go and find lots of fun clips of me making all types of suggestions during meetings to like, hey, how about we do this right now? And people being like, that's too complicated. How dare you say that? So, but I will say, I think that we're starting to get, I think lots of people are starting to say many of the same things. And so that's sort of opening up the conversation, I think, in positive ways to okay, like what do we control of our process, and so we'll see. I would love to check back with you in a year.
Yeah, definitely. So I want to move this to a sort of a broader thing. But before we do that, what else should people know about how city government works that they don't realize?
I think that our budgeting process matters a lot. And how the city spends money matters a lot, not just from the perspective of this is like taxpayer dollars and, et cetera, that type of political discourse that always takes place around government spending, but from the perspective of we make these decisions in advance, the things that we're going to do, and people should be very engaged in helping to shape that process. Not just the week of, hey, oh, now it's budget month or whatever. Everybody gets serious about thinking about it. But no, like these should be things we should be thinking about consistently. Hey, wouldn't it be great if we had more funding for this? Great. Like, let's start thinking about how we get to that point. And they're really difficult decisions because you're operating with a limited amount of money. And so anything that we want to increase means that there's something else that has to be decreased. And nobody wants to answer those questions. And yeah, I think that if you really want to understand city government, then, follow the money and be engaged on those questions of how budgets are formed and presented and demand input on that.
And is that something that the community is involved with generally?
They can be, yeah.
But are they?
No.
Yeah. Because who wants to think about a budget?
Yeah, I mean, but it's also, there's this weird tension, right? There's this really weird tension of, in a representative democracy, you elect people because you do not want to do that, right?
Right.
But on the other hand, then it's like those elected officials need your input. If we're talking about iterative processes, then we need your input. There is this other tension, and at least I think it's a sort of subtension of the same one, which is, do you elect people to basically just make all decisions? Like, right? So in other words, like, okay, we've elected you now, broad goals, whatever, make Bloomington awesome, go. Like, right? Check back with us in a couple of years, right?
Yeah.
I don't, or do you elect them to constantly represent you, in the evolving sense, right? And I think that it has to be closer to the latter, but again, it's then the responsibility of the elected person to do the work to really engage with the people of this city. To shape inputs as they're developing, and where if there's a time where I'm like, hey, I have this wonderful idea and none of you are on board with it, well, then it's also my responsibility to convince you before I move forward on it.
Right.
Like
you being the community, the people who elected you.
That's correct. That is correct.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
That's correct. It's saying I think this is a great idea. Of course, I'm not going to do something outside just because I'm elected. It's within my no. It's I want you to come along with me, right?
Exactly.
And it might be I might be very right, but I could be dead wrong. But I got to make sure that people are coming with me.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. But so then, how do those conversations happen, on the ground?
So the most effective way is door by door.
Mm-hmm. Constantly.
Yeah. I mean, we do it when we're trying to get elected.
Right.
We should be doing it when we're and it's
do you do that?
Yeah, yes, yeah. So
really?
So yes. Knock on people's doors and ask them what they're thinking about things. Now, I wish I could do it more.
Yeah.
I wish I had time this summer, for example. I have a lot of time, my intention is to knock on doors with very structured questions that I want to know. What's your input on these things?
So I do want to take this a little bigger now. I'm thinking about our larger issues in the country and the partisan divide and all that stuff. And there's lots of theories, and I think there's a lot of different aspects that we can understand, a lot of media, how media works and everything. And one of the things, I guess, the theory that I would have is that it has to do with people's access to government and how much they can trust it as a result.
Yeah, I trust certainly is one side of this. I think the other side of it, though, is what we were talking about earlier, which is being able to directly tie government to the outcomes that you're right,
like the pothole.
Yes.
Do you mean?
Yes.
Yeah.
It's really quite interesting. I'll make this statement, and then there are some things that I should say before I say this, but just to directly illustrate the point is that right now we have a presidential election where objectively this last administration, this current administration, has passed some of the largest, most significant spending bills, infrastructure, CHIPS Act, right? And this is both Republicans and Democrats, right? Like so there's good to go around, okay? That's not really a central part of the current election cycle.
That's for sure.
And thinking about how you connect, hey, this really cool thing has happened, and we're working for you to, Margaret Thatcher and Ronald Reagan came to power around the same time with an ethos that was built off of this simple idea. Society doesn't exist, right? You are an individual, a rugged one at that, who can exist on your own and build yourself up, right? And if you're poor, that's your fault. If you're unsuccessful, that's your fault. And if you're successful, that's because you're great. Right? And Ronald Reagan said the greatest lie, or whatever he said, evil or something like that. I'm probably misquoting him, but is I'm the government, I'm here to help. So this is that notion that what we need is to be left alone. Now, you would think that during the coronavirus pandemic that we would have learned very clearly that regardless of our desires to be left alone, that we are in fact living in a society, that the decisions that you make affect me, whether I do everything right or not. Right? That and the decisions that I make affect you. And what this is maybe too ambitious, but what we would have learned as the United States if we had a sort of global perspective is also that the decisions that we're making as a country are actually affecting everybody in the world, right? So like our policy choices on how we responded to coronavirus affect everybody. Now, instead, we again saw the clash of those ideals of rugged individualism versus collective good. I think that it's somewhat of it's somewhat misleading when people say like America is more partisan than it's ever been. Like if you talk to folks who retired people from the Hill, they're like, it's been this way. Like this is nothing new. I think the difference is that we're so polarized in the way that we do not talk, and never shall the twain mix or whatever, right? Like, these two sides are so far apart that there's no dialogue in between. And so we're living in a time where nuance is required, but nuance isn't allowed.
Because of the ways that we're talking and not talking.
That's right.
Social media, online,
That's
versus
right.
like you were saying earlier about the loss of third spaces and civic organizations.
Yes. And so
religious organizations.
So I think in the real sense, like if you really talk with folks, if then we talked about going door to door as an example. Being in Indiana, we talk about the Indiana way, right? We've stopped talking about it. We should talk about it a lot more. But the Indiana way traditionally was that you were bipartisan or apolitical, that you were pragmatic, right? And that you knew your facts. This was sort of the Dick Lugar sort of approach, right? And I would say this is actually how one of my favorite people, Senator Young, is. That's what the Indiana way was about. If you talk to folks at a door-to-door, no matter where you are, whether you're in super liberal Bloomington, Indiana, or wherever else in this state, we're just pragmatic folks, like on a normal sense. We're not that overtly political, not that overtly red or blue or anything. We're just people who care about, okay, like let's be pragmatic here. But at a mass level, there's no space for that communication right now. And so what we can do at local government, right? So you're sort of taking the conversation that we're having and expanding it. If we here do the work of engagement, we do the work of equity, equitable approaches, bringing folks in to build the table, right? We do good communication on, hey, we just received $5 million in ARPA funding from the federal government, right, to do X, Y, Z. These are the things that we're doing and providing for the people in Bloomington, Monroe County, whatever. I think that's how you start to, that's one of the ways that you start to building more third spaces, right? Like all politics is local at the end of the day is really what I'm trying to say. And that breakdown of local media, that breakdown of local political structures, our inability to get out of our own way, right? As a city government to serve the people that elected us, I think are all making this polarization worse. So it's something that I think we can play a huge role in. And I think we also have a good opportunity to show, it's something, again, like this, when I talk about the Indiana way, I think it really is an opportunity that we have as a state, as a community, to show that there is a better way towards sort of bridging divides, bringing folks together and moving forward. Yeah, there's so many other things, but I mean, like I feel like we could have another hour of a conversation. I hope that we can, maybe like someday.
Yes, I definitely want to.
Tomorrow.
Yes. Tomorrow, right, sure. Sounds good. Let's definitely do it again. Yeah. But in the meantime, thanks so much.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
And that's our show. If you, like me, have struggled to get involved, but unlike me, you found a way, we'd love to hear about it. Send us an email or a voice memo through the contact tab on our website, wfiu.org/interstates. Tell us your story, and we'd love to share it on a future episode. And if you like the show, give us a rating and review on your favorite podcast app. It'll help other people find it. And tell us what you've been up to while you listen. Like, maybe you recently got laid off, and so you've been taking some time to polish up your resume, and it's a little weak in the managing people area. And it so happens that your sister-in-law is looking for someone to take over for her as the chaperone for a field trip of about 50 kindergartners to an exhibit of ancient Greek urns and vases. And she says it'll be a really good place to develop those management skills, and you've been trying to decide all week. And then you were listening to Interstates today, and you heard Isak Asare say,
like, how do you say no to that opportunity?
And you thought, good point. And now you're hiding in the museum bathroom, questioning whether you really want to keep listening to our show. The Interstate staff wants to apologize, but we still want to hear about it. Okay, we've got your quick moment of found sound coming up. But first, the credits. Interstates is from WFIU in Bloomington, Indiana. It's produced and edited by me, Alex Chambers. Our associate producer is Dom Hyab. Our social media master is Jillian Blackburn. We get support from Eobon Binder, Natalie Ingalls, Luann Johnson, Sam Schemenauer, Peyton Whaley, Lisa Robin Young, and Kate Young. Our executive producer is Eric Bolstridge. All right, time for some found sound. That was a wood chipper on campus a couple weeks before school started. Until next week, I'm Alex Chambers. Thanks as always for listening.